Hello, dear viewers and our listeners. Welcome to another exciting episode of NorthStar. I'm Jignesh along with my co host Rikkin, and we are here to share learnings from seasoned sales professionals and leaders that help founders to successfully scale their startups and also help young professionals to build a successful sales career. Hey, Rikkin, who do we have as our guest and what we are learning today?
Thanks, Jignesh. Today we are joined by Enno. He is a senior revenue executive with more than 20 years of experience in scaling SaaS and enterprise softwares across EMEA. And he has led major sales transformation, built channels and partner ecosystem, driven triple-digit growth in a PE-backed environment. And help companies navigate international expansion. Post-merger integration and go-to-market evolution is his capability. Welcome, on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on the call and to go through some questions and answers, and hopefully I'm able to add value to the listeners.
Absolutely. What we are trying to double down on this podcast is how do we build predictable revenue in this chaos, right? And you've driven triple-digit growth. I think 200 or 300% in the chaotic environment. What is something that founders usually get wrong about growth?
Well, first of all, 200, 300% growth does happen, but unfortunately not every quarter or year. If it was so simple, then again, everyone would be in sales and it would be a walk in the park, etc. So I think one of the first things what founders potentially get wrong is they look at the unicorns. And I think using unicorns as an example and as a NorthStar to orient against is important, but because another startup was successful might have more to do with luck rather than with planning. Again, that Google came up with the search engine at the right time. No one else had one, and they met the right people at the right time, made the wrong investments at the right time. That drove basically success. And I think one thing what I've seen quite often with founders is they are looking exactly at these companies and they think they can easily replicate it. And then reading 50 books, and I have seen so many founders who are reading all the books from all the successful founders. And I'm not saying don't read and don't educate yourself. That would be wrong. But when you read things, you have to contextualize them. And if you are the 50,000th company who creates an ERP system, again, it has to be outstandingly unique to make a difference in the market, allowing you to go into hyper growth and to succeed, basically. There's another thing what I think is also very important, and that comes at a later stage, is when the founder-led sales moves into professional sales. That's also, in my opinion, one of the big issues or challenges what I've been confronted with coming into organizations where the founders have been successful, and the founders have one big element for them. They have credibility. They built the system. They are living the dream. They are rising every morning to be successful, to sell their vision, etc. And that comes with a lot of credibility and makes people buy a product and believe in the story. If you now bring someone in from the outside, because again, you can only make so many calls a day, of course, that person is not the founder in most cases. And that means that person has to develop credibility. And very often this comes with the famous war stories. Well, oh, I have been in a company which is similar to yours, and this is how we solved their problem. Building these war stories and being able to present them in a comfortable way and in a way that people believe you is something what you have to earn over time. And now the next challenge is usually, and I know the answer is getting a little bit bloated for a quick question, that when a founder is in, usually that person also didn't come to their situation overnight. They developed into it, and the same time has to be given to that new person being hired into the organization, and that takes time. That's something what people very often overlook. And these are key components. And maybe, sorry, I have another one, which is I think is super important for founders, is to acknowledge time. I'm pretty sure we are going to speak about the MEDIC framework later on, which I'm a big proponent of. But there is also an element of time in this, and also an element of time in Bund. And time, especially when it comes to sales cycles, very often founders confuse that they sell something very quickly. And the relation there is whether be having the right timing, having the right approach to the deal, which means I'm in a large corporate, I have a problem, and then there is someone, Rikkin, entering the arena. He is able to fix my problem, most likely at a very low price, because Rikkin wants to have his first customers and he's happy for 10K, while everyone else would charge 100K. So in the end, you are buying your deal via flexibility and price points. And that deal might have closed overnight. However, when you are properly selling, a sales process might, and I usually say it's 9 months in top of funnel, it's 9 months in a funnel. It takes time to close a deal. And when you're moving into a professionalized sales environment, this factor of time is very often overlooked by founders, because it simply takes time to close something, and it doesn't happen overnight, especially when you're charging normal rates, when you are constrained, for example, by resources for delivery, and you're no longer having that singular customer you are successful with.
So true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've covered a lot of aspects where I think patience, giving time to people who are new, how things change when you are, was a founder led versus bringing in somebody from outside. All of that are very well. And if I were to give you like a $20 million ARR SaaS company today, but that is stuck, what is the first thing that you would fixed? What is the first 30-day plan would look like as a sales leader?
It's sort of pretty simple, but very often very depressing, and that is to look at the numbers. I have seen so many companies where I entered, especially startup. Again, they have read all the books. They know ARR, ACB, and all the 3-letter acronyms by heart. But when you start to look at a CRM system, and I hope this company you are handing to me has a CRM system of any kind, they are carrying a lot of dead projects in there. And there are a multitude of reasons for it. So the first thing, and I get to the reasons in a second, but the first thing I would be looking into the CRM system, trying to understand what is happening there. The bigger question is now, what am I looking for? Because again, they are looking at the same data, but what makes my look different from theirs?
Yeah.
And one of the first things that I'm looking is, for example, age, opportunity age. And I have come to companies multiple times. We have a big pipeline. Look, hundreds of millions. The world is ours. There is only one path, and it's full success. However, it didn't happen for whatever reason, but it's just around the corner. Look, we have 100 million in pipeline. We only have 20 billion in goal, so 5x coverage. Happy days. And then you start to look at the pipeline, and you see opportunities which are, for example, 600 days old. Okay, so 600 days. Help me understand, what's the pending event. So you created an opportunity 600 days ago, and it's still open at some stage in the opportunity flow. Most likely they have created a 12th stage opportunity flow, and it's stuck somewhere, and it's not moving along, and it's in that stage since another 300 days. So you ask, like, what is the pending event for this opportunity, which is open since 600 days? Well, we met them at a roadshow, and they wanted to, or at an event, and they want to buy something. They have a need for our product. But again, they have taken what is also called as the happy ears problem, that they heard someone explaining to them exactly what their problem is. They had the solution, they created a lead, but they didn't properly qualify if that person actually has a problem or can buy. So I think time is one very big thing to really dissect the pipeline and to understand what's going on. Again, then it comes down to velocity. When was the opportunity touched last? What is the last touch point with the customer? Yeah, we spoke to them 350 days ago. Okay, so how would you know that this person even works there, or that the problem still exists, etc.? So again, velocity, understanding what is going on in the pipeline. And why is that all happening? I think with your 20 million ARR company, which is already pretty significantly big, it's not a small organization, but very often for smaller startups, what I've seen is and I hope no investors are listening in here, many startups inflate their pipeline and they don't clean it. Because investors, especially in a highly competitive market, what we have had a few years back, they just looked at companies, they looked at the story, and again, not just we all have FOMO when we look into our investments. Investors also had the FOMO issue, and they were concerned, like, I'm missing out on this NorthStar super duper startup. So they are looking at the pipeline, and for founders, it was actually beneficial to have a very big pipeline with all these deals, and they could name, for example, a company, and they could show, like, yeah, they want to buy something, and we spoke to them at an event, etc. But they have basically not gone back in cleaning up their pipeline, so they carry a lot of dead weight. And when you go through that pipeline, maybe a 100 million pipeline for that company turns out to be, and I've seen that happening so often, to be 1x, and if you get lucky, 2x. And
Wow.
then you usually run into issues. And I think, and one thing maybe also for the listeners is context. My background is large ticket, long sales cycle, enterprise B2B. So when I speak about deals, they are usually, again, a small one might be 5 digits ACV, large ones might be 6 or 7 digit ACV without services. So having a pending event is absolutely necessary for a deal to close. There is not like when you are in a B2C world and you have an app that I tried, it's $10, whatever, and I hope for the best. And if it doesn't work, I cancel the subscription and we call it a day and we stay friends, and maybe I try again in a year from now. When from the world where I come from, again, it's ERP-like applications. Maybe it's only 50K ACV as an initial investment, but you usually can see with these applications 3x for the implementation. So on top of my 50K ACV investment, I have to look at likely 150K of services getting the product running. And that means by default, if you're looking at a 5-year horizon, you have to have, let's say, a good 700,000-800,000 K set aside to make this project work. And that means you're looking at a proper project where customers will make a very educated decision in buying or not buying your product. And if there is no need, they're not going to buy it.
Yeah, true. And you've touched upon a very valid point, honestly, the deal part, the aging part, the velocity part, because I was just having my review with one of the leaders within my company, and he touched upon this exact same thing, that Rikkin, if you have this thing open since last maybe 100 days, this is not moving. You have to clear it out.
It's actually a distraction for a lot of the sales people, right? So you have too many deals, but they are not able to focus on the right ones.
Yeah, and this becomes like a valid excuse for salespeople not to double down on the right things. So it's a trap, honestly. But happy to hear that the problems or the sales is same everywhere.
I have seen it, and as easy it is to speak about these things that everyone else does it wrong. I have done it wrong myself over and over again. And I wouldn't even say that I'm today, with all the knowledge and experience I have, I will not do it. I think it is down to having a very rigid model everyone has to comply towards. And then you can drive success. But it's basically having really a playbook, what you work against, and no exceptions allowed. And especially if the founder comes in and says, I want to close this deal. No, you don't. You in, work like everyone else. And I think that's very important. And by the way, I also have been that founder who came in and did things because they were super important, and they might have closed successfully or maybe not.
Thank you, Enno. And that brings us to a very important next question, right? So you have worked with PE-backed companies. How is growth thinking different, versus a founder-led startups?
Well, I think the question needs to be reframed a little bit. PE and founders likely will not see each other at all. So usually you have venture capital firms who are involved in this business. And the key component here is to understand the difference between VC-backed companies and PE-backed companies. And there is a very subtle difference between the two. So when you are a startup and you're looking for funding, you likely go to a venture capital firm. And the venture capital firm predominantly is interested in growth. That's where you have all the rounds A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on, what the alphabet carries. And as long as you are in a growth mode, a VC will understand that you are not profitable until maybe funding round C. And if you're really good, and I've seen that happening in one of my companies, we only had an A round, and we were diligent enough and constrained ourselves enough to stay within an A round, which really helped with our valuation. So I can definitely say to any founder, try to have as few rounds as humanly possible. Maybe give yourself a little more time and don't fall in the trap that, hey, I'm going to do a B round and then a C round and I get a lot of money, which again, you're going to get. The challenge is you are devaluating yourself and you are devaluating the value of the company, not just for yourself, but also for the people you have given all the ESOPs and God knows what options for. But to go back to the question, VCs will fully understand that a company is in growth mode. It will not be profitable until round C for most of them. And even then, it's not like stellar outperformance. But a VC usually buys something to, again, whether pour more money into it, next VC, and at one point the companies get larger, and then you IPO in a perfect world. That's the VC storyline. So the key driver is growth. When you work with PE companies, the only thing they care about is EBITDA, and EBITDA, and then growth. And why growth? Ultimately, first of all, PE companies very often are, pension funds, etc. And when you are in the pension business, people expect payments, and that payment has to come from a profitable organization. And usually, once you are in the PE cycle, that can be, for example, that at one point a VC firm says, I want to get out of it, the company is profitable, so I can sell it with a good return to a PE firm. And PE firms will buy companies when they are profitable, when they show basically positive growth. So they whether the VC sells off to the PE firm, or the PE firms help, for example, with when the founders say we want to get the VCs out, and they help with basically a buyout, a management buyout, or last but not least, what I've seen often happening is also that they buy companies after their IPO, because an IPO, as attractive as it may be at the point of IPO, it's a pain in the tailpipe because you get so many regulations when it comes to reporting. It's just mind-blowing. So it's only so much fun. So at one point, a company might also say we are going private again, and that's where the PE firms come in, because not too many people have enough money to fund these things. So a PE firm will be heavily interested in EBITDA, and for them, the element of growth comes in to tell a story to the next firm they are going to sell to. So for them, they need to show, and that's falling under the rule of 40 for most companies, and if they are super successful, it might be a rule of 50 scenario, that they are saying we want to have 40 consisting out of EBITDA margin and growth percentage. And if you combine the two, and if you're over 40, happy days. If you're not over 40, not happy days. And you're not going to sell the whole thing to the next one to do things. And that is a huge differentiator. For example, also when you work with VC firms, they will allow, for example, for overinvestment, because they will be interested in that hyper growth, we conquer the world, etc. While a PE firm might even squeeze you quite a bit in reducing headcounts because they are not super profitable. The revenue per head is not adequate, and then they save money because, again, they need EBITDA first of all, and growth. They usually need more towards the tail end of the investment, when they have to create a storyline when they sell to another PE firm and move on. So
Absolutely.
very different scenarios.
Very insightful as to how PE funds operate differently as compared to a VC fund. And the motivation or is very different when they think about growth. Okay, and what are the three levers that actually move revenue fast when the time is limited before an exit? Considering say for a VC fund.
I think the important thing is to do more from where you are successful with. Um, and that's easier said than done. I think it's important to understand which industries are you successful in, to double down on those, and maybe also to optimize your investment or also to disinvest in areas where you're not successful in. It's all about doubling down on the areas where you are successful and moving away from areas you are opportunistically successful in. I think that's the first thing. The second thing, again, it's pretty much similar to your PE scenario. I think it's also when you're moving towards the exit scenario to optimize basically your cash flow position. The more, again, the more effective you are, the higher your valuation will eventually be. And then there are also some organizational factors. Have you built an organization that can scale even without you? Because I have seen it quite often that after the IPO, the exit, the God knows what, the founders might leave the organization. And the more or the better you have built your next layer below the founders, the better it is for your evaluation. And last but not least, be very, very transparent on your numbers. Again, once you are at an exit scenario, you have a strategic buy, you have a PE fund coming in, or God knows what, or God forbid, you are going IPO, auditors are going to be your best friend, and they are ripping apart every small part of your organization. And the better your data is prepared, A, the less it will cost you, and B, the more credible you're going to be in the overall storyline and in exit scenario.
Thank you, Enno. That's super insightful again. And what separates startups, right, that scale predictably versus those grow randomly?
Again, it's about the playbook that the startup. I think a startup needs to experiment in the early days. You need to test things, because I think one of the key learnings what I've had also about myself and about my career is don't assume things. Don't assume that you know everything, because you don't. So a startup absolutely needs to test things, try out things. And that's also one of the big benefits why large corporations will work with startup, full stop. But I think the later you are in your journey, the more structured you need to become and the more repetitive you need to be in the areas you are successful. You can still test, but make the testing maybe 10% of your income stream or your pipeline rather than 90%, because then you are still going left, right, and you're not understanding where you are eventually going.
And does that impact the morale of the employees as well, as they see a lot of randomness within a startup, after a certain point of time?
Absolutely. The biggest concern or the biggest complaint I've always seen from employees in any startup, and to be honest, in any company in change, and a startup is in change by default, because again, it's growing, it's adopting, it's changing, etc. And even in a scale up, there is always change. But when you lead people, and that's independent if you're a finance leader, sales leader, the R&D leader, God knows what leader, the more predictable you are and the more clear you are, the more happy people will be when they follow you. Again, I don't think it's about perfection, because again, if you are, and again, I've been it myself, I know you need to be more clear, or you didn't tell us, etc. And maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But the point was that people need to understand that in the majority of the cases, they know where you are going. And yes, sometimes you miss the boat and they miss the boat, etc. And people need to understand that mistakes are made on both sides. But I think clarity is the essence for everything in being successful with your business.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In fact, to your point, right, where you said that people start reading books about successful businesses and then change their strategy. Uh, a founder reads a book over a weekend and the strategy changes the next week, and it's damn frustrating for anyone, whether you are a sales or any other role, right? And just going double down on the sales systems aspect, which I believe is very critical, because the more process oriented you are, I feel that's where the success is. But you've implemented Metic, you've implemented it at scale. uh, when the systems are so clear, why do still most teams fail at it?
Again, it goes down to clarity. Most medic implementations or any systematic implementations fail because no one took the time to explain it to the people why on earth they should be doing it. And maybe I want to draw an analogy to another area is resource constraints. So let's assume you have your sales organization, and of course you have the two pre-sales people who are often the demo monkeys, but they are only two, and you have 10 sellers. So they are fighting about the two people. And every pre-sales person I know, or today they are called value engineers, will be complaining, I have too much stuff to do, I get bombarded with BS work and not qualified deals, etc. So I do a presentation and it doesn't have any real impact. And this is where Medic comes in and helps. Medic helps a seller to understand the metrics. Why would a customer buy, and put them against numbers? They help to understand, do I know and speak to the economic buyer, or just the champion I met? What's the decision framework? What's the decision criteria? And what is ultimately the implied pain? So the key here is, if you build a model where people understand out of the 6 components of Medic, they have to meet at least 4 to call in a pre-sales engineer. Of course, everyone will be screaming because, yeah, I have 3, I'm close enough. Yeah, but not 4. Then make an effort to understand the why they are going to buy, how they are going to buy, who you are going to sell to. What's the metrics? They help you to sell. You will be far more audible ready in front of your customer in understanding why they are buying and how they are buying and when they are buying. And when you have 4 out of 6, you are allowed to call Mr. Pre-sales, and he will do everything to make you successful. But forcing them down the route of Medic, I have qualified my deal, Rikkin, you don't. So you're not getting pre-sales, but I get my pre-sales resource. So next time when I didn't do my homework and you did your homework, then you are getting the resource. So it becomes far more transparent who's getting what and when. And I think once people start to understand that Medic is, for example, not just a tool which is for, again, VP sales, Overwatch, C-level, I get on people's nerves, micromanagement. It must not be a tool of micromanagement. If you implement it just because you are micromanaging people, you will utterly fail, full stop. But if you're implementing it and explaining it, look, if you, seller, really understand who is buying the product, and it's likely not the person you met at the trade show and who was super excited because you can fix something. And also what I use 2 frameworks. Usually I use Medic for in-funnel projects because that's where I have more information. But I also find it super important to use another framework for top-of-funnel conversion. So when you do your lead generation, and at one point you have to pass it on to sales, and then sales will always complain that the person is not good, they can't buy, etc. And again, it happens. Is where I put in the BANT qualification. That's just 4 letters, or is it 6 letters for Medic, and BANT stands for budget, authority, need, and time. And I usually said it has to be 3, and need always needs to be there, because you can't even present to something if they don't have a need. You can clarify, do they have budget? Is a person able to buy? And what's the timeline? You have to have 3 out of the 4. Once you do, you can pass it on to sales. In the perfect world, you have 4, but I'm gracious. I'm allowing people to only have 3. And then the seller can say, okay, now I'm trying to sell the product to the people. But again, need always needs to be there. And the other 3 do need to be set. And then that's a good qualification for lead into an opportunity. And then Medic is a tool to help with velocity and to also bring in certain resources, because again, resources for value engineering, etc., are scarce. And that means you can only have so many, and you should qualify deals accordingly.
True. True. And in fact, this also answers my next question, which was like, how does a good pipeline hygiene look like? Right? You've spoken about the first aging, the second about velocity. You also spoke about medic and then bank approach, where you sort of move things clearly. Anything else that you think is a good hygiene for any sales leader, any founder who's had like a 4 or 5 member team, which you recommend following?
Um, Again, I think Bund and Medic are super simple to implement. There is a gazillion YouTube videos, blog posts, and
Yeah.
what knows was of it. Work it into your system. But for example, when you build a CRM system, that is something where I have seen CRM systems fail at scale. I think at one of the companies I worked in for 1 year, there were no checkboxes available anymore because I think they implemented all checkboxes on the planet into our CRM system just to move one opportunity from one stage to another. And I think we had like 14 stages. Was a nightmare. You had to click like, did you meet that person? Do you know the birthday of that seller? Does he have kids? And God knows what. I'm exaggerating here, but there were so many things what you had to enter that at one point you just went like, fuck, I need to move it on, click, 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 and you just put in garbage data. The key component for pipeline hygiene is use as little as possible stages in your opportunity flow, but as many as you need to properly close and qualify the deal. That is, I think, utterly our utmost important. And then use Medic, for example, as gates, so you can pass from stage 1 into stage 2. You need to have certain things identified. For example, at moving from stage 1, which is, let's say, first qualification, I need to understand who's the economic buyer, what is the pain we are solving for. For moving from stage 2 to stage 3, you have to have the metrics in place. As an example, you need to understand what would happen if they don't make the investment today. What's their cost of not making the investment?
Not doing it.
As an example,
Yeah.
what's the value you are generating? That will help you to qualify the opportunity, but on the other hand, it will help the seller to answer that famous, yeah, but what's the ROI of my application? Well,
True.
you just told me if you're not making the investment, you're going to lose 100K on every deal. Our product only costs 50K, so it's paying for itself for the first opportunity, as an example. So
Yeah.
again, once people understand why Medic exists, and it is not, and I repeat myself, it must not be used as a micromanagement tool. It must be used as a tool where the leader can have an educated discussion with their seller. And in the perfect world, the seller will ask immediately, yes, of course, the paint is worth 100K, and they do it for themselves because they understand that it helps them to close deals more efficiently and have a more educated discussion with their buyer. Then the hygiene happens on its own. That's at least my experience.
Makes sense. Valuable point. And you've led a multiple team, multiple companies, different stages, right? If I were to sit with you, with your sales team, just observing, for 1 week, what are the signals that will tell me that, Rikkin, this team is going to hit the quota, or maybe they will miss badly? What are some telltale signs that you see that will make you decide on the either or side of things?
I think the audible readiness, and that was something also in one of the trainings, that people are audible ready. When I call them out and say, what's the pain? And again, when they just open the opportunity, they might not have all the data, but if they are working an opportunity since a defined amount of time, they are able to answer the standard questions about an opportunity. You will see that people are in control of what they are doing. And that determines if they are going to be successful or not. And I think the importance is also knowing when to walk away from a deal.
Yeah.
Maybe you have all the right signals, but again, the investment is optional. It would be so cool if we had your product. But if it's not quantifiable and there is no pending event, they are not going to buy it. Full stop. And I think having
True.
also an understanding for the economic climate, and maybe it's currently all under pressure. They have the need, they have the desire, the right people, but it's currently very tense. So I think having a sales team which is audible ready about their customer base, what's going on, and so on, that is the biggest driver for success over anything else.
Basically, being closer to the ground, being closer to the customer, and knowing what's happening, that will make them ready. Either it will pass or either it will fail. In an essence, is that right?
Yes.
Interesting. And what is the brutal truth about a sales team that no one wants to admit?
Yeah, that the pipeline is not real. Again, and this brings back the whole thing about pipeline hygiene and so on. Another thing, what I have seen also by myself, that the goals which are given from corporate or from the C-level are simply not realistic. That's another thing.
Well, thank you for admitting that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the importance is that the numbers are realistic, waterfall down to the seller, and not that my number is 100K and I give Rikkin the number of 1 million because I feel that, yeah, if the stick is big enough that he closes 1 million, I get to my 100K. I think it needs to be challenging but realistic. And as long as you're carrying that forward and you integrate that into the planning process, then people will also obey to the rules. Otherwise, they keep stuff in the pipeline because, again, no one wants to be called out in a sales call. Hey, where's your number? What's going on? And so on. It's, again, that's one of the key components where teams fail in the first place.
Hope the founders listen to this very carefully. And the next topic is really interesting for the founders, right? So, how can they scale internationally, right? What mistakes do US companies make when entering EMEA region?
It's the same failure what German companies would make going into India. I think usually it starts with not understanding what they are getting into. And I've worked quite a bit with Indian companies, and I've never been to India. It's on my bucket list, but I learned that India is a very, very big country with many languages where there are so many different geographies, and that's welcome to Europe. Many countries, many geographies, some poor, some rich, some fast, some slow, some whatever. So I think the most important thing when going international is understand your key market. And the biggest mistake, for example, what American companies make, and I have a suspicion that also Indian companies have a tendency in making, is starting in the UK. Unfortunately, that's not Europe. The benefit of the UK is it's sorry for the UK listeners in case it's little US. It's the 52nd state or whatever. They speak English. They have the same legal system. It's easy to comprehend. But it's not. It's first of all, it's not Europe. And I think my English is quite well, and I understand international business. I've worked for American companies. I failed more often in the UK than I succeeded. And the main reason is I didn't understand what I'm getting into. And it starts with showing commitment to a market. And what I personally did wrong when entering the UK market from Germany for a US company, so again, what could go wrong is I went in there with one seller because, again, I had Germany is more or less in the same time zone. We are 1 hour apart. We all spoke English. We had English marketing material. So what's the difference? But I use always one example for when selling into the UK market, which I think is a very good one when also demonstrating how the difference is within one language. It's the healthcare market in the UK. You're not selling to a hospital, you're selling to the NHS, or you're not selling to a healthcare provider, you are selling to the NHS. You have to say NHS. And you're not selling to a hospital, you are selling to a trust. Again, same thing, it's a hospital, but they call it trust. And once you are not understanding what they call something, it becomes very, very clear that you don't know what you're doing. That's the first starting point. The next problem usually is, especially in big markets in Europe, like the UK, like France, like Germany, if you're saying, yeah, I'm serving your market from the Netherlands, for example, and the Netherlands, I think, is a perfect starting point for your journey in Europe because they speak English very well. It's a very advanced market, very agile, very friendly for investments from the outside. But in comparison to Germany or France, tiny. But I would, if I came from the outside, I would definitely consider the Netherlands as a starting point. But also already going into Germany, if you don't have German-speaking resources, good luck with your journey. It ain't going to happen. And it's the same with French or with Spain. Of course, you can get so far with English. Again, people speak English, obviously. But again, the deeper you go or the more specialized your product is, the more likely it is that you have to speak local language. Then in Europe, we have very strict rules around data privacy. We have very strict rules about how you market to people. You can't just send out emails, do massive cold calling, etc. Yes, there are ways around it, but it's not as easy. And I think the importance is understand the target market. Spend some time in checking out, can my product work there? And one of the biggest things is, oh, the UI is in English. Yeah, good luck. If you try to sell a product with an English UI into the German market, I'm not saying that it doesn't work completely, but you are minimizing your success rate quite a bit. It's the same thing if I go and sell in the UK with a car with a steering wheel on the left-hand side. Because again, we Germans and we Europeans drive on the right side of the street for right in multiple ways. But again, it won't work. Can this car operate in the UK? Absolutely. Will people buy it? Absolutely not. Or only very few. And I think that is the understanding one has to have when going international. Understand your market. Understand also, is your product able to be successful? Does it speak the language? Does it comply with local laws? Does it integrate into systems which are local? Again, if you go into Germany and you don't support SAP and you have a B2B application, yeah, good luck. I'm not saying that it won't work, but SAP might make sense. And it's the same with other applications if you're in a certain industry.
Thank you so much, Enno. And what's the hardest part of aligning headquarters strategy with local markets?
I think this is something where I can speak to Indian companies because Indian companies have one very interesting dimension to them, which is super intelligent people. Most people I've been working with out of India were outstandingly smart, outstandingly intelligent, and extremely cheap under European terms. And this is how the whole outsourcing world came to be. And again, you can work on projects where in Europe you are charging 200, you bring in Indian resources, you do it at 50 and you're still super profitable. Again, it doesn't speak about quality. And this is one of the problems where Indian companies have a tendency to run into issues. Because you now have your product, you have built something which works, and you're now going into Europe. And let's assume your product works, it has market fit, it can be sold, happy days. And then you're saying, yeah, but I want to do the services out of India because they are cheap. I can charge 200 versus 50, and I make a shitload of money on services because I can outsource them to India. And that will likely fail big time. You have to build a beachhead in Europe. Again, goes back to local language, understanding local ways of selling, translating. And that's also one difference. What I've seen, again, Indian culture is different from German culture. I'm not saying good, I'm not saying bad. It is simply different.
Yeah.
So when I, for example, go back to, and I'm asked to do something, if I strongly think that it's a stupid idea, I will tell the person, dude, this is a very stupid idea. If you work with companies from Asia, from India, people might say yes and think no. And you, again, I was told yes and happy years, it will all be good. And eventually, my Indian counterpart might say, "Yeah, it doesn't work anyway," and will not do it, or will do it halfway, or in a different way than I thought it would be. So having someone on the ground in the target country is super important. Being able to translate local culture and language into local culture and language.
Yeah.
And also bridging the gap. Did you really say yes, or did you mean no? And that will remove a lot of the ambiguity in that go-to-market. So again, the investment and just saying we can do it cheaper is not going to cut it. Having, let's say, maybe doing 20 to 30% project management, local delivery locally, and then 70% in India, that will absolutely work, but you have to invest into a strong beachhead on the European soil or on the American soil, same storyline, to make it successful.
Moving on to the next segment, you've done turnarounds, you've done scaling, you've done management and PE pressure also. What was the toughest moment in your career?
Plenty. There is not a single one I can point out. I think it's usually, again, it's all about change management. The biggest problem about change management to start with is that people don't understand that they have a problem. Or maybe they understand that they have a problem, and they even know what the solution to that problem is, but it's very inconvenient in fixing the problem, or also hard or painful, put in some negative adjective into it. And convincing them that, we all admit that it's painful, we all admit this is a solution, so now we need to do it. And this is usually the biggest challenge. And usually, again, when I'm brought in and when I'm doing things, I'm not brought in because everything is super happy. Again, I've also started in startups where they were like, we are growing and there is the sky's the limit, etc. And ultimately it turned out that the pipeline was too inflated, etc. So at one point there is always that hard discussion, whether upstream or downstream. Funny enough, very often bringing the bad news upstream is a bigger challenge than downstream, because again, you have maybe a founder who has done the founder sales, has been successful, and now this stupid Enno guy comes in and says that the whole fantasy world doesn't work, at least not as stringent as they assumed it would, and maybe the timelines are not met, etc. And that is one of the hardest things what I went through, and that can also be a make or break point, because you need to have also a leader or founder who understands really there was a reason that someone like myself was brought in. Again, everyone says you are successful and you have been successful and you have experience, but if you are not able to accept the experience, and that doesn't mean that I'm always right, don't get me wrong. I'm likely as often right as I'm wrong, but as we all have to be understanding of each other, we have to accept one other's opinion. And then the worst thing what I have seen is every startup is, of course, data-driven. And then you present the data and you're saying, look, dude, that's not going to work out. No effing way. It ain't gonna happen. The sales cycle doesn't work. We always need 9 months to close. Or for example, for delivery, I have seen that often that if we do that, we need like 2,000 people in services because there are only so many hours one can deliver. Then this doesn't work. And you can prove it by the numbers. And then the founder still says, no, I read a book. It can be done differently. We have to think broader. And you sit there like, what is it? Is it now the product? Then help me understand how we, for example, halve the time for implementation or make it 1/10.
Valid, absolutely valid. I mean, I've been in such situations myself, and I can clearly see the parallels between what you've said and what the result came out to be. And what is one skill that made you successful that people underestimate usually?
I think recognizing patterns is a very important skill in that context. Being able to look at numbers or results on a wider scale and understand yeah, we also always sell into mechanical engineering, and that's where we are successful. Or we always sell into this customer base, this region, and people simply the conversion rate is higher. And then understanding, is the pattern linked to a person, to, for example, a certain industry which is super receptive to the product what you have built, etc. I think pattern recognition and being able to draw conclusions is the most important asset I think I have developed over time. And another thing which I think is of equal importance but very different is the ability to apologize. Because again, as much as you do things, and again, I'm wrong very often. Sorry, I hate to break the news. I'm wrong quite often. Why? Because again, maybe I didn't spend the time. Maybe simply the stars didn't align, etc. Again, there are 50,000 reasons why one can be wrong. And of course, if you're leading people, you might sometimes also send them up the hill where there are unfortunate things which are very unpleasant, and then you have to apologize afterwards that this didn't work out. So I think it's very important if you're a leader to be humble, to also have the ability to say, sorry, that's on me. Because then people will also, they trust that you have their back when something goes wrong. And second, that they are more receptive to the errors you're going to make. And everyone is going to make errors. There is no way around that.
Yeah.
But when people see that you are humble and you are also admitting that you did something wrong, I think that's a very big treat from a leadership standpoint. And again, that's unrelated to sales, but in general, to do things.
Valid point, Enno. And when you make internal mistakes, you can apologize, and people do start trusting you more. But does it translate outside also? What I mean by that is, if you mess up with an external partner or a customer, and then you apologize that, hey, I made my mistake, I'll fix it. Does it make you lose credibility in the market?
Again, it depends. Was it a stupid mistake, which was like jumping off a cliff without a parachute? Or was it jumping off the cliff with a parachute and the whole thing didn't open? So I think there is a very, very big difference in the kind of error you're admitting to. Again, there can always be oversight. I thought I have a parachute with me. Surprise, surprise, I didn't. Oops. So again, that is one of the more stupid mistakes one can make. But I think in general, everyone makes mistakes. I have seen it on the giving and the receiving end. I had service companies who committed resources which eventually haven't been around, to customers who wanted to have people on site and they didn't have the team in place to start the project, etc. Again, it can go both ways. How to mitigate? A lot of planning. Will things still happen? Absolutely. But then it is, again, it's like in every life situation, it's a give and take. And as long as your counterpart doesn't feel abused, like they always have to give and to balance out your mistakes, you will make a mistake, I will make a mistake. I think if we come even and we all both feel that everyone is trying his or her best to make things work in a good way, and also sometimes you have to swallow up the frog and cover the cost.
Yeah.
And own it. And again, if you do something wrong and owning it goes a long way, but then also you have to ask in return. It's not that the customer is always right. If they F something up, then they also need to own it and possibly pay the bill. It's not that the customer is always right. It's a give and take scenario. And I think as long as no one in the whole chain doesn't feel abused, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Not fine, but acceptable.
Yeah. And I think so. I know it's very also important for founders to create a comfortable room where people can admit their mistakes. Because a lot of the times there is a fear, and that's where when people, rather than admitting the mistakes, they keep on blaming others. So I think so creating that comfortable room is super important.
Yes, and I think one thing I also have to say about founders. So founder is someone in most cases who is very smart, who has an idea about a problem he or she wants to fix and starts a company. That in itself requires a lot of courage, which I salute everyone in doing. I did things similar, but not to the extent that I took an idea, started my company, went through all the ups and downs, getting it developed, getting the first customer done. I came to the party usually a little late when already the beer tap was open, so I could have some drinks. And then I scaled with a beer. But again, I didn't start the party and plan the original party to start with. So I think when working in a startup, especially with first-time founders, also people entering that game have to understand these people likely have not done it before. Will they make mistakes? Yes, plenty, a lot, often. Why? Because again, they haven't done it. There's a huge difference. And again, if I come to an organization, I'm doing this now since over 20 years, the likelihood that I enter into a situation which I have seen before is outstandingly high. The chance to surprise me is very limited. That said, if you're starting a company, the chance that you are surprised by something, and that can be something where I don't even blink with an eye because I've seen it 50,000 times, and the founder goes like complete ballistic on it because it's the first time he's experiencing the issue, is something what also people need to understand when entering into startups, when they are starting. And again, on all the founders, and I've maybe done some founder planning here, but I think also it is upon the people who work with them to understand that these people likely do it for the first time, and there are going to be things which are outstandingly amazing. I've seen, and again, there was a reason why I did many startups, because I really like the environment. You can get things done which in a corporate world are unthinkable. So again, a lot of upside, but I think also for the people possibly listening here who have never worked in a startup, they need to understand there are things going to happen which are going to be unpleasant. And yes, it's the founder's fault, but likely that founder has never seen that situation. So be also a little bit apologetic, or not apologetic, but humble and forgiving in these situations.
Absolutely, Enno. Completely resonate with what you said now. And one critical piece of advice for someone trying to become a top 1% revenue leader in the future.
I think the biggest question I have is, maybe I have to expand a little bit on it. Why do revenue leaders fail? Is too often that the best seller gets to promoted to a point that he or she is no longer successful. Because it is a strong belief like, hey, Enno is the best seller and he now gets a team and he gets along, and then at one point he becomes VP sales and God knows what, and the team suffers miserable because he is not a good leader. And I think that is something where people have to be clear what they want to be. And it's always great to say, hey, I'm VP sales of, I'm CRO, CSO, some whatever 3-letter acronym. And that sounds super important. But the importance there is, do you want to lead people? And do you want to accept that you are not the best seller in the room? The worst thing for you to do as a sales leader is, go away, I'm going to do it for you. I sell it for you. No, you need to coach. You need to stand behind people. You need to give them hints and tricks, tips, how they can be more successful. You need to coach and train them so they can be a force multiplier for you in making you as a leader more successful, because eventually you're not going to be measured against how much you sell, but how much your team or your whole organization sells. And that means you can't be the bottleneck in sales. Does it help if you know how to sell and you can successfully sell? Hell yeah. Should you be the best seller in the room? Absolutely not. And you should be standing that, and you should be helping people to be successful over having the desire to get out of my way and I do it for you. And that's where I think I would, let's say, reframe the whole thing. I think for sales leaders and revenue leaders, etc., I think the biggest question, first of all, is, do I want this to be? Because you're no longer, again, if you are really a revenue leader of a large organization, the last thing you worry about is sales, to be honest. Yes, of course, you have a sales number to deliver, you're selling, etc. But you're going to be far more in escalations, customer calls where people are screaming at you why someone sold something to you which doesn't work. You are down in spreadsheets planning next year's target, compensation models, and God knows what. Sales or revenue leadership has, brutally honest, very little to do with the actual selling thing, but a lot to do with planning, management, delegation over the cool thing. And I think what people have to make a decision is, do I want that, or do I want maybe something in the middle? And again, there need to be also people leading very successful teams and so on. So I think that is something, and again, that likely goes for any position in life. Would I be a good CRO of Microsoft? I don't think so. Again, I think I can do a pretty good job and I know what I'm doing. Would I be able to run the sales organization of a large multinational corporate, God knows what? I don't think so. I wouldn't hire myself for that role, to be honest. I think there are people more qualified, but these people won't be able to do what I'm able to do.
Yeah.
And that goes a lot into that direction. Have a very clear understanding of what you can do, what's the right size of organization for you, and how much strategic and politic work do you want to perform. Because the higher up you are, the more likely it is that you have very little to do with sales over something else.
Absolutely, and in fact, a leader should be proud if he can create like better versions of himself or herself when they were selling. I think so. They should feel proud rather than a FOMO that they can't do the things. I think so. Pretty true.
100%, and likely they are going to be actually measured only against how good their team is. If it's a good organization, they should be measured on how good their team is over how much they closed individually.
So true. So true. Perfect. And this brings to our last exciting segment, which is a rapid fire. So we have 5 rapid fire questions, for you to very quickly answer and, of course, reason out as well. So, Enno, starting now, AI will replace salespeople. Agree or disagree?
No. Oh, but it will replace salespeople who are not using AI for their advantage.
Perfect. Medic or product-led growth, if you could only pick one?
Medic, because it will help you with product-led growth.
Okay. One sales trend everyone is talking about that you think is nonsense?
One sales trend. I think the whole thing that AI will replace everyone and everything in the process. Again, like AI for cold calling. I have no idea how that is going to work in a B2B world. I even doubt that it will work in B2C properly. Will it work for customer service? Absolutely, or to an extent, but maybe for qualification. But having, for example, AI outreach to end customers. Hello, I'm the AI agent. Do you want to buy a product? I don't think so. No.
No way. And what's the fastest way to destroy a high-performing sales culture?
To give them unrealistic goals.
Okay. What's more difficult, fixing a broken sales team or entering a new market?
Oh.
That's a tough one.
I think entering a new market, because fixing a broken sales team, you have an environment where you have control over, and you can work, you can isolate the issues, and you can also identify them. If you are entering a new market, I think that's also another thing. If you're entering a new market, it takes years, period, full stop. At least in the B2B high-ticket world, it takes years. And in years, there are many things which can go left, right, and above and beyond. When I have to fix the sales team, which is broken, I have to first look at the numbers. Maybe it's a pipeline issue, maybe it's a people issue, etc. The problem can be diagnosed sort of easy via the numbers, because again, sales is a numbers game, so it's pretty easy to diagnose. Again, take pretty easy with a grain of salt. And then you can work on fixing it by replacing people, working more on the pipeline, spending more money, etc. So very simple. Fixing a broken sales team is easier. Is it a walk in the park? Likely not.
Got it. Great. This brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you, Enno, for having this podcast with us and sharing such an interesting insights.
Absolutely.